The room I remember most clearly is not the room where it happened. It is the room before it. A small bedroom in my parents' house in Holmes County, Ohio. Late October. The window glass cold to the touch. My wedding dress hanging on a nail on the back of the door. Plain dark blue, the way old order requires. There is no closet in an Amish home, no ceremony of unveiling. There is only the dress on the nail and the morning coming faster than you want it to. I was 19 years old. My mother was somewhere downstairs. I could hear the other women moving through the kitchen, dishes clinking, low voices, the particular sound a house makes when it is full of people who have come to witness something they will never speak of directly. And I was standing in front of the only mirror in the house, kept in that room for practical purposes only, doing what my husband-to-be had already done twice. I was inspecting myself. My name is Hannah. I grew up Old Order Amish. I left when I was 26. This channel is where I finally say the things my community would never allow me to say out loud. And today I want to explain what I mean when I say he inspected me. I mean that word precisely. In the community where I was raised, marriage was never a private agreement between two people who had chosen each other freely. It was a covenant between families, blessed by the church, governed by the Ordnung, the unwritten but absolute code that shapes every part of daily life. Who you may marry, when, how, under what conditions. The Ordnung does not write these things down. That is the point. They live in the understanding of the community, passed from generation to generation, not through documents, but through watching, correcting, and knowing. And one of the things that is known, though rarely spoken of above a whisper, is that a man considering marriage is permitted in certain districts to conduct what the older women called a suitability inspection. It has no official name. It is not announced. It appears nowhere in the church teachings as a formal practice. But it exists the way many things in Amish life exist. Everyone knows. No one says. When my mother told me it would happen, she did not explain it as unusual. She explained it the way she explained everything difficult. Briefly, practically, with the tone she used when telling me how to slaughter a chicken. This is how things are done, Hannah. It is not for us to question the way things have always been done. I was 18 when she told me. Joseph and I had been courting 4 months. He was 22, ran a small carpentry shop on his family's land, had a reputation in our district for being steady, hard-working, fair-minded. The kind of man a father pointed to when talking to his daughter about what a good husband looked like. He had asked my father's permission to proceed toward marriage. My father had said yes. Then my mother told me what came next. A man considering marriage, she explained, was given 1 or sometimes 2 opportunities to inspect his intended bride. The purpose, as the community understood it, was to confirm suitability for the work of marriage and family, that she was healthy, that she was physically capable of bearing children and managing a household, that there were no hidden conditions the bride's family might have concealed to secure the match. I asked my mother if Joseph would be in the room. She said yes. I asked if I would be alone with him. She said no. She would be present, and one of the older women from the church, a woman who served in an unofficial role as a kind of midwife and advisor, though she was never formally named as such. She would be there too. I asked what he would be looking for. My mother's expression changed in a way I did not have words for at the time. I have words for it now. It was the expression of a woman who had accepted something she was never given permission to question, and who felt, in the moment of passing it on, the weight of what she was carrying. She said, "He will look to see that you are well." That is all she said. The first inspection happened on a Thursday evening, 3 weeks before the wedding date. I was brought into the sitting room while my father and brothers had been sent to tend the animals. The older woman, I will call her Rebecca because that is not her name, sat near the window with her hands folded in her lap, waiting as though a church service were about to begin. Joseph came in. He did not look at me the way a man looks at a woman he is courting. He looked at me the way a man looks at a piece of land he is considering purchasing, assessing, measuring. His eyes moved without embarrassment, because in the understanding his community had given him, This was not something to be embarrassed about. This was a practical necessity, a responsible step. Rebecca spoke. She told me to stand straight. She told me to turn. She asked me to extend my hands, palms up, so Joseph could see them. She asked him if he had questions. He asked about my health, whether I had been sick in recent years, whether any weakness in the lungs ran in the family. My mother answered most of his questions for me. I stood there. I want to be careful about how I describe what happened, because I have had years now to process it in therapy and outside of it, and I understand it differently at different distances. At the time, I was not angry. I was not even frightened, not exactly. I had been prepared for this. I had been told it was normal, and in my community, it was. There is something that happens to a person when they are told something difficult is normal, especially from the time they are very young. You do not experience the thing as wrong. You experience it as the way the world is. The feeling underneath it, the one with no name that came later. What I felt standing there with my palms up while Joseph looked at my hands was something I would not be able to identify for another 8 years. I felt like something being evaluated rather than someone being known. Rebecca guided the inspection with the efficiency of a woman who had done this many times. She spoke to Joseph with a practical authority, offering her assessment of my health and constitution in the same tone my mother used when discussing livestock. Capable, strong frame, good teeth, good eyes. She will carry children well. Those were not her exact words, but they were close. Joseph nodded. He thanked my father, who had come back inside by then. He did not thank me. He left. The older woman gathered in the kitchen afterward, speaking low in Pennsylvania Dutch. I stood alone in the sitting room for a moment, looking at my hands, the ones I had held out for him. Then I went upstairs and made a bed that did not need to be made, just to have something to do with those hands. The second inspection happened a week later, shorter, and also more specific. I will not describe in full what it involved. What I will tell you is that afterward, Rebecca said to my mother, in a tone I was not meant to overhear, but did, because I was standing 3 feet away, "She will do well." 4 words, as though I were a field determined to be fertile. After I left the Amish world, I found a therapist, an Englishwoman who had spent years working with people leaving high-control religious communities. When I described the inspections to her, she was quiet for a moment, and then she asked me a question I have thought about nearly every day since. She asked, "Did anyone at any point ask you how you felt?" I had to think about it. I thought about my mother's face when she told me it was coming. I thought about Rebecca's calm efficiency. I thought about Joseph's assessing eyes. I thought about my father shaking Joseph's hand afterward in the kitchen. "No," I said. No one asked. She told me that was not incidental to the practice. That was the practice. The absence of my feelings was not an oversight. It was that my experience of the inspections was not considered relevant information. What mattered was Joseph's assessment, Rebecca's verification, and the family's satisfaction. My body was the subject being examined. My interior life, what I felt, what I feared, what I needed, was never part of the evaluation. It never had been. I want to tell you about a woman I met years later, after we had both left, at a small gathering of women with similar backgrounds. I will call her Anna. She was from a neighboring, more conservative district. She had been inspected 3 times before her wedding. Her intended husband's family had requested a 3rd examination because there had been, in their words, a concern raised after the 2nd one. Anna never found out what the concern was. She was simply told to present herself again, and she did. Afterward, the concern was resolved, and the wedding proceeded on schedule. She told me this matter-of-factly, with the steadiness of a woman who has done a great deal of work to speak about certain things without falling apart. I asked how old she was. She said 17 for the first 2, 18 for the 3rd. I want to be clear that this practice is not universal across all Amish communities. There are hundreds of distinct affiliations, each with its own ordnung, its own level of conservatism. In more progressive communities, practices like this have faded or disappeared entirely. But in the more conservative Old Order and Schwarzentuber communities spread across Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Indiana, versions of it persist. Not because anyone stands up in church and defends it, but because the Ordnung does not need to be defended. It only needs to be maintained. And it is maintained the same way everything in that world is maintained, through silence, through the assumption that what has always been done is what should continue to be done. Our marriage lasted 6 years. I will not say it was without love. Joseph was not a cruel man. I do not think he understood that anything about those inspections had been wrong. He had been raised to understand them as a responsible man's due diligence, a protection for both families. The framework he had been given told him what he had done was careful and respectful. His community handed him that framework, as surely as mine handed me my silence. That is the thing I have sat with longest. Not anger at him specifically, though there was some of that in the early years after I left, but something larger and colder. Anger at a system that handed a 22-year-old man permission he did not know he should have questioned, and handed a 19-year-old woman a silence she did not know she was allowed to break. If you grew up in a community where your body was evaluated before anyone thought to ask how you felt, I see you. If you were handed a silence and told it was modesty, I see you. If you stood in a room with your palms out and smiled because you had been raised to understand that this was simply the way things were, and some part of you, small and quiet, knew something was wrong, but had no language for it and no permission to speak it, I see you. You were not wrong. You were simply given a framework too small to hold you, and the mistake was the framework, not you. This is my story. If it stayed with you, tell me in the comments, and subscribe if you want to keep hearing the truth from behind the prayer cap.